Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Gareth Greenaway joins me. We're going to talk about Magnolia, the content management system written in Java, and Blossom that lets you talk to the swing stuff. Don't know much about that, but we're going to find out. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Gareth Greenaway. Episode 277, recorded December 18th, 2013. Magnolia and Blossom. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I'm your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at StoneEdge.com, bringing you as often as I can, usually every week, the movers, the shakers, the big projects, the small projects, projects you might not have ever heard of, projects you may be using every day and not realizing it. Lots and lots of open source, lots and lots of free software. Really enjoy this gig, really having a great time with it. And for 2 weeks in a row, I've taken the helm here. But I'm still sort of between cruises, so you won't see me for the next couple of weeks. Actually, I'll be back before the next show. That's probably true, too. So always joined by a wonderful co-host this week, same as last week, Gareth Greenaway. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Randall. Glad to be back.
Yeah, cool. And so we're both sort of in Southern California, and it's sort of a gloomy gray day out here. I'm again speaking to you from the nondescript hotel, and I'm trying a slightly different tethering method, so hopefully we can get a little better quality than last week's show, but we'll see how long that lasts. We got to see if that makes that work. Let's see. So we have a great show today. We've got the project is Magnolia, which is a content management system, Java-based, but also specifically a module for it called Blossom, which integrates Magnolia and Spring. Now, I'm not a Java guy. I've done everything I can to deliberately not learn anything about Java in my career. So some of these terminologies that our guests are probably going to use will probably be a little over my head. Are you a Java programmer by any chance, Gareth?
I am not. I think I'm going to be in the same boat. They're going to confuse and dazzle and amaze us with all their Java terms.
Well, you've used content management systems before, right?
I have used content management, mostly like Drupal and similar content management systems like that. I've never actually used Magnolia before.
Okay, well, we'll have to ask them. You'll be able to ask some questions then about the difference between that and the kind of things you're familiar with, so that'll be good. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guests. Let's go ahead and start with Tobias. Tobias, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Garrett.
Well, I'm not Gareth. That's the other guy.
Yeah. Bit confused here.
Like
Thank you, Randall.
Okay. And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you from Gothenburg, Sweden.
Wow. So it's like 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon?
5 in the afternoon.
Oh, that's not bad. Not bad, yeah. I just got back from a Europe trip, so I'm sort of somewhat oriented to the time zones over there. And what is your role with Magnolia? Well, before we do that, first, what is a Magnolia content management system? Give us the 30,000-foot view of the problem that it's solving.
So Magnolia is a CMS system primarily used for building websites. The main focus is for web content management. And it's open source. It's been around for 10 years. It's good because it's very extendable. So it's used by companies and to build your business on top of it. That's what the users I talk to tell me that's why they chose it, because it's so easy to, as a developer, make it do what they want it to do.
Cool. Well, Tobias, let's put a note on that for a second. I also want to bring on the other guest that we have today, a coworker of yours. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Randall. Hey, Gareth. A long time since I've seen you, I think. Probably 7 years. In any case, thanks.
So seen who? Which of us? Did you meet me?
Actually, probably both of you, come to think of it. But Gareth, 6 years ago at Scale. You maybe the same amount of time at OSCON.
Cool, yeah. I go to OSCON every year that I can. I missed a couple of them so far, but not too bad there. And where are you speaking to us from?
From exotic Vancouver. So just up the coast in some ways.
Vancouver, Canada, as opposed to people from Portland, Oregon, who call Vancouver, Washington, across the street or across the bridge there. So cool.
Exactly.
And what is your role with the Magnolia?
I focus on community management and kind of like you guys, I am not a Java developer. So this is a new and exciting thing for me.
Good. Well, we'll
So I
get
can
back to you in a
also
second.
probably,
Sorry.
I can help translate.
Very good. Very good. Let's go back to selection bias and sort of get the history of Magnolia and particularly the history of Blossom, because you were involved heavily in that. So how did the Magnolia project get started, and when did you join the project, and where did Blossom come from? That's like 3 or 4 questions. It'll probably take you 20 minutes to answer.
So the CMS system is actually from Switzerland. They started it 10 years ago at a company that were doing website projects. Back then, they used CMS systems and did not find any of them to be really capable of doing what they wanted it to do. They wanted it to be really, really simple for users to use. And I've only been with the companies for 3.5 years, and I came onto the company thanks to open source. So I got this job thanks to open source. I was working at a partner company where we were doing a project for a travel agency that needed tons of integrations for booking air tickets, rental cars, hotel rooms, all of this. And we needed a CMS, and we picked Magnolia. And that's when I and my colleagues had the idea to integrate it with Spring Framework. So we wrote this module, the Blossom module, and we managed to get the permission to open source it and put it out there. It started to be popular. Actually, the Magnolia, the company, started to get support requests for getting assistance using it. And so later on, when I was looking for a job, I just on a whim talked to Magnolia and asked whether they had any business in my region. And the response I got back was an email with one sentence in it, which was, "Call me ASAP," and a phone number.
Nice.
So I called them and I got this job.
And
so now I work.
Go ahead.
So now I work there on the product development team on the product, and I maintain this piece of open source that I wrote 3 years ago.
And what specifically problem does this piece solve?
So the problem it solves is that it integrates with Spring Framework, which is a middleware framework for Java. It's become the de facto standard on the Java platform. It's actually also 10 years old, and it was started as a reaction to the complexity of the Java platform. And I think that Java still has a reputation for being extremely complex and hard to use, time-consuming, with complicated APIs. And so Spring was started as a reaction against this. And it's actually, in my opinion, it's transformed the platform into being much more easy to use, much more dynamic, and it makes developers much more efficient. There's less boilerplate code to write. There's excellent tooling for most of the stuff. And my module integrates all of this into Magnolia. So you get the CMS, which is a product which does content management, and you get to take advantage of this middleware framework, which allows you to do interesting things on top of the CMS.
So this is, just to clarify, this is all happening server side. We're not talking about client side Java. That was popular for a while.
Right, it's all on the server side.
And so when I'm interacting with Spring, or therefore also interacting with Blossom to connect it to Magnolia, what am I working with? What am I trying to solve? I'm building widgets. I'm connecting, object relational mapping. I mean, what sort of problems is it solving in building websites?
So Magnolia CMS is a component-based CMS where the authors piece together their pages using components. So you can have a YouTube component, you can have a component for like an image gallery and so on. And what the Blossom module allows you to do is write one of these modules or using Spring framework. And within these, there's usually integrations with web services for pulling information, for doing payments. E-commerce is a typical use of it. So once you need to have that piece of dynamic functionality to put onto the page as a component, that's where Blossom shines.
Okay, so I'm not actually I'm creating web pages by coding up Java code. I'm not also using. Am I also building it in an HTML editor too, or is it all basically generated code?
So the logic behind the component is Java classes that you're writing.
Okay.
Taking advantage of Spring there. Then you're using a templating language like JSP or FreeMarker. These are very similar in function to PHP. Basically, you have tags mixed with logic. And this gets rendered into the page where this, on every page where this component has been added by an author.
Okay, so I might have, for example, a to-do list, and the to-do list would have some Java backing it that would be able to go get the information from the current database. And then I'm rendering it as HTML, so the browser only sees the resulting HTML.
Right.
Okay, and is there two-way communication? Can I also have active components in that resulting thing that go immediately back to the database or allow me to do sort of AJAX calls to update those?
Oh, sure. Yeah. You can direct requests using REST, specifically towards one particular component, and it can execute logic and return you the response you need from your REST request.
Okay, and so the content management system how's Magnolia compared to other CMSs? We've had like 4 or 5 CMSs on the show. Is it really full featured? Is it still coming along? I mean, 10 years is plenty of development time, right?
I think I would pass that question over to Zach. I'm completely focused on Java and Magnolia. Okay,
let's go to Zach then.
Right. And so for background for me, I've used a lot of the different, well, there are many PHP-based CMSs. There are many CMSs in general, but I've used a pretty wide range of the major CMSs that are written in PHP that are out there, and have built things with them. So that's part of my basis for comparison. So the things that I find interesting about Magnolia are that, yeah, it is quite full-featured. So out of the box, you'll get things like, for example, staging, the ability to roll back content that you've published and then decide you need to unpublish. There's a lot of really nice don't repeat yourself that's baked in. So it's uncommon for us to write something just because we can. We're much more likely to look for the best component out there in the open source Java world and use that. So for example, we don't have our own idiosyncratic templating language, as any number of CMSs seem to. Instead, we use a variety of other well-established templating languages. I think some of the other really important differences end up being the user experience and the focus that we've got on mobile and touch devices. So CMSs, typically the experience for non-technical users isn't that great. They need to fill in a lot of forms. The system works in ways that may not make sense to them. We've worked very hard to build the CMS, so it works in some ways when you're editing content a lot like a smartphone app. It's very simple, it's very directed, it's very easy for non-technical folks to get their hands on. And that works both on the desktop and on touch devices. So someone can be working in the field using an iPad and connected to the cellular network. So if you have someone like an insurance adjuster working in the field, they can take pictures, update cases, really get a lot from the CMS in a setting that's not typical for a CMS to be in.
So what would you say the major differences? I mean, you said that you had used a lot of the major PHP-based CMS systems.
Yeah.
What would you say some of the major differences between, say, Drupal and Magnolia is? Where does Magnolia really shine?
So Drupal is driven by a very large, very active community. And Magnolia has a much smaller community, but a lot more focus behind it. So I think that we end up having a more coherent CMS. There's a broader range of features included by default that are better engineered to work together. So we don't have all of the richness of Drupal because Drupal is very, very rich. But the coherence, I think, more than makes up for it. Other key things end up being how tightly bolted or how well integrated key features are to the core. So for example, a lot of Drupal developers end up having a pretty standard set of modules that they'll install and ways that they'll customize Drupal when they start using it. And with Magnolia, it's much more that all of that's included by default. So workflows come just as part of the system. WYSIWYG editing, content staging, features around dealing with performance. All of these things are baked in. And it's not that you can't easily further extend it, but we kind of have the complete set that our core type of user has needed. And that core user is typically an enterprise that relies on the CMS for the core of their business. If the CMS goes down, it's a disaster for them. So they have pretty stringent requirements.
So a lot of the stuff that you talked about, that Magnolia comes built in, has a lot of those kind of modules. Have you taken cues from Drupal in terms of like, well, Drupal doesn't come with this out of the box, so Magnolia does come with it out of the box, like the WYSIWYG editor, for example?
Not at all, actually. That's been interesting to me in that Magnolia seems to have been driven in its development much more by customer needs and by partner needs. So while the partners may have used many other products and the customers may have, we don't seem to spend a lot of time looking at other tools to figure out what they've done and what they haven't. It's been much more based on what people ask for. And of course, early on, the comparisons that we made when trying to find a content management system to meet our needs.
So going, like you mentioned, partners and customers, is there a commercial version of Magnolia?
Yeah, there is an enterprise edition that has a couple of components that are not available for free licensing. We sell that on a subscription model, and it tends to be to, well, like I said earlier, groups that really rely on the CMS for their day-to-day business. And that subscription includes some support and various other services.
So do people typically start with the community version, and then if they need those additional modules, they'll move up to the commercial version, or do they usually kind of start with the commercial version right off the get-go?
It really depends on the corporate culture. If someone is experienced with open source and that's where they're comfortable, yeah, typically they will begin looking at the community edition. They'll grab a copy, download it, play with it, see if it meets some of their needs. Other groups may simply look at the site, look at some analyst reviews, and call us up. It really varies based on what the customer expects.
Now, as far as the kind of like release cycle for Magnolia, how does that work in terms of the open source version versus the commercial version? Are there kind of like, if someone finds an issue in Magnolia, how quickly does it get ported back into the community version versus the commercial version?
Quite quickly, but with the community edition, we do the patches rolling forward. If someone is an enterprise customer, then we will backport patches for them. So that ends up being the key difference. So it tends to be that if someone stays in the community edition, they stay on the cutting edge. If someone has a large, these are hundreds of thousands, multi-million-dollar projects, it may take a while to change a bunch of the infrastructure that's built up around a given install. So they're very interested in having security patches and such backported to the versions that they rely on.
Okay, so it's usually it's a case where the commercial version is based on the open source version with those extra commercial modules that you provide.
Yeah. And with some patches backported, but they're quite similar. The key difference for customers really ends up being the support and the services around the Enterprise Edition. I think the other differences are pretty cosmetic.
Okay. I had some additional questions regarding. Actually, before we jump there, let's. I had a question. How does someone get started with Magnolia if they wanted to start taking a look at it? What would their first steps be?
I think the very fastest thing is you just go to demo.magnoliacms.com, log into the admin interface, and start playing around. But for developers who want to get a little more insight into how they could work with the system, I think they should just do what I did when I started with the company. I grabbed a copy of the software, installed it, and started trying to tinker. It's a really fast install. I had it up and running in 15 minutes, which really blew my mind. I've installed other pieces of Java Enterprise software, and or I've tried to, and found it to be a tough process. And then once you've got a copy up and running, just Google for Magnolia Academy, or perhaps we can add that to the captions later on. It's a simple guided introduction to Magnolia. It's not a bad way for a developer who's not from a Java background, or who is, to get an overview of the system, how it works, and what they can do with it.
So what are the kind of like requirements if someone was to go and download it and set it up? What if any external requirements do they need to have in place before they can begin the installation?
You download a tarball, you unzip it, and you navigate to a directory. You start up Tomcat. It's a really simple thing. There are no external dependencies. You might need to update Java. I just run it on my MacBook. But you don't really need to do much outside of that, which is really quite nice.
Okay. So going back to a question for Tobias, Randa was talking about the kind of the structure of the pages that you put together in Magnolia, and it sounded like you were talking that you actually embed Java classes within your content. Is that accurate?
So every page has a template, which is a free marker or JSP. Those that I mentioned are similar to how PHP is written. Backing that, there's a Java class which can execute logic. And then on the page, you have certain, you define areas. We call them areas. So the header, the footer are areas. You have a main section, banners off to the right, possibly. And within these, you bring in components. And the template, the area, and the component are all using a template and then backed by a Java class.
Okay, so now, I mean, again, I'm not a Java guy, so forgive my Java ignorance on this question, but when the page is rendered, you enter the information. Are the Java classes, are the pages compiled, or is the Java kind of interpreted on the fly as the page is loaded?
So the classes are compiled, and when the page is rendered, the rendering engine goes through the content, all the information that has been put into the page by the author, and it figures out which components were assembled. It executes first the class for the template, then for the area, and then for all of the components within it, rendering also this template, which, basically it renders what the class returned to be displayed. So the content is driving the rendering engine, instructing it what to do.
Okay, so is it a case where, like, if I make a change, the page gets compiled, it gets displayed, and then the next time someone comes along and looks at that same page, it won't necessarily be compiled again until there's a change has been made?
Right. So the Java class is compiled once, like a C program, and then used over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the features that Zach had mentioned that I was hoping we could talk a bit more about was the staging aspect of Magnolia.
So what you do is you install Magnolia on an author server where the users of your organization or company works with that instance. They create their pages, and once they're happy with the page, they publish it out to what we call the public instance. So both of these two types of instances are running the same code, the same product, but one is facing the public internet and one is internal within the organization. And this means that the public instance needs to be scalable to support all of the web users, and the internal server is where you can work with the content. That's the staging, really. And to scale, when your website grows, if you have more visitors, you simply set up more public instances. So that's how we scale. And the data is replicated on all of the public instances. They each have a copy of all of the data. So there's very high availability in such a setup. If one server goes down, all of the others have a copy of the same information.
Okay, so in terms of the staging aspect, so if I had this set up at my company, and someone is working on the staging server, they do what they need to do. They kind of test it out, stage it. Okay, oh, this looks good. So within Magnolia, there's the functionality to then publish from the staging server directly up to the production server?
Yeah. So you publish it from the staging to the public instances facing the web users. And in that process, you can have a workflow where a webmaster has final say whether something goes out to fit the needs of what your organization requires, which of course depends on who are using the system. So in the staging environment, we encourage users to allow as many people as possible in the organization to have access to the system, of course within limits. So a certain department can have access to the pages related to that department, and then there's the final say of the webmaster whether that goes out.
Okay, so if I go through that whole process, I tested it on my staging server, I publish up to my production servers, and then I realize, oh no, what I didn't do what I thought it would do. What kind of process is there, or what kind of support is there for me to then revert that change off the production server?
So what you would do then is unpublish, which basically removes the page from the public service.
Okay, hey, I've got a question for Zach. I was listening in a little bit earlier. So in terms of the community edition, you obviously have a number of people actually employed by the company making money off of the non-community edition, making contributions back to Magnolia. But how many of your contributions actually come from the outside rather than being somebody that's internal to the company?
A fairly significant number. There are a couple of key modules. I can't give you an easy percent right now because it's a little hard to break things up that way. But for a relatively small community, I'm surprised at how many contributions there are. It tends to be that these are partners who implement websites and other solutions based on Magnolia. Some of them very habitually contribute their code back to the community. So, for example, OpenMind in Italy has some tens of contributed modules. And other partners or other users tend to contribute pieces here and there that are back. Contribute small pieces back.
And one
nice
advantage.
Things, yep.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Okay, because Magnolia is quite easy to extend, it tends to be that these are quite nice standalone little pieces of functionality. Makes it easier for people to contribute back as opposed to having to directly work on the core, which I think would be tougher for a lot of contributors.
So part of the design being modular means that I can go ahead and create an extension and not necessarily, as long as I'm complying with the module API, I don't necessarily have to worry about how it interfaces with everything else. And I bet also that you don't have the great divide that a lot of open source projects have where, say, GIMP users, for example, probably don't have a lot to contribute back because they're not GIMP programmers. Everybody that's working with Magnolia is really coding Java at some level, or they wouldn't be able to use it at all, right?
Not quite. This is one of the interesting things. Magnolia is easy to extend at many different levels. So we've had contributions that range all the way from the standard template that we include with Magnolia, which includes accessibility features, but it's all HTML and CSS. So it's easy for a designer to come in and contribute at that level. They can simply use the tools that they know to do that. With other things like we have an easy way to extend Magnolia called apps. They're small, standalone pieces of functionality that work kind of like a smartphone app. They tend to do one thing well. You can even develop those now just through configuration. No coding needed, even though it's handy, of course, to be a developer of some kind because you have to wrangle XML files. And it sort of keeps going down from there. You can be a hardcore Java developer and make patches to the core. You can be more average workaday Java developer and contribute modules and so on. But there's usually something for almost anyone who's working in the web space to do, which I find pretty neat.
Do you have a way of having like a contributed area somewhere on your website so people can find out what else other people have and are willing to share? Or is this all sort of independent through them where they have to advertise their own GitHub address or whatever?
People tend to do what they like at times. So we have some people who publish things on GitHub or SourceForge. We have others who maintain their own code archives. And of course, we have our own list on the company wiki. But we have done a good job at times of hiding people's contributions, not intentionally, but we need to provide a better listing of them, certainly.
And I presume some of these end up in the core then. Do you have a contributor agreement? Do you have to sign over stuff if it's going to be in the core, or do you let them retain their own copyright?
We do what Apache does. So we use the Apache contributor license. So people retain full rights to their code. The only thing they lose is what you always lose with these agreements, which is the right to exclusively license your work to another party after the fact.
Right. And
we try to follow these practices.
Go ahead.
We just try to follow these practices.
Very good. Very good. And yet neither of you were around when the decision was made to use the Apache license, but have you talked to people who chose that, and do you know why it was chosen?
I wasn't around, that's true. What I've heard is that it was simply what people we looked up to were doing. We rely on a lot of open source or a lot of Apache projects for our stack. And so doing what they did and what we had already worked through made sense. And, Apache's an awesome project. There are worse projects to follow the practices of.
Well, so there's a huge component, obviously, of open source in this, but there's some proprietary stuff, and there's clearly a company that's trying to make money off of this. Who decides the ultimate roadmap then? Is that done internally, or is that done through a community effort, or something in between?
It's somewhere in between. We're interesting in that, well, my experience as a community manager is with much more diverse communities. Magnolia's community tends to be more professional. I got to frame this. Well, it's a lot of system integrators and agencies. The people who contribute code tend to be programmers who work for bigger shops. And so our community tends to be much more focused around the needs of their customers. So we find that it's much more integrated, say, with the sales process and the service process than I'm accustomed to with other projects. So, for example, participating a bit in Drupal, you've got many, many different kinds of stakeholders and many, many people involved. And we've got a much smaller group that's involved, and we know more of them, most of them, personally, or at least someone in the company does. So it's a fairly different process.
And what sort of groups are using Magnolia? Well, let's actually distinguish Magnolia Community Edition from Magnolia Professional Edition. What kinds of groups are coming to you for that? And can you name, I know, like not necessarily the company name, but like the sort of, at least the arena they're playing in?
I'm sure, and I can name some specific references as well. So the differentiation between Community Edition and Enterprise Edition for users, it doesn't end up being that big. Typically, the Enterprise Edition users, they need support, and they're doing really heavy projects that their quarterly numbers or yearly numbers may depend on. So they've got a lot at stake, which tends to be why they want the services that we offer. Maybe people who use the Community Edition may have less at stake, so they're more happy to do things on their own. But we don't find that there's a massive difference. It tends to be just about how important the project is to the company. And as for the companies and the spaces they play in, they range from, we have reference customers like Atlassian, who makes a lot of dev tools for Java developers, to news organizations like, say, Al Arabiya, who publishes massive amounts of content across the Middle East and the web. They have, the numbers aren't sitting right here in front of me, but if I recall correctly, they'll have, say, 40 editors working on their various, I think, 4 different sites at a time. They'll have each month 70 million visitors. So fairly heavy-duty use. We have a lot of use across media, publishing, so everything like, for example, the U.S. Navy, they use this for their recruiting site. So they have a need to stay online, be secure, publish content that's attractive quickly. And it's easy to find these things. If you visit our website, we've got a whole stack of reference customers on the front pages and interior pages.
I'm really confused by your reference to Atlassian. Don't they have their own product?
Yeah.
It's essentially a CMS.
Well, they've got a wiki, which they use for a lot of their own projects. But for their training platform, for the Atlassian Academy, Magnolia was a way better fit for them. We're really strong at integrating a bunch of different components. So if you've got many different backend systems you need to tie together, and they're Java-based or even not, we're probably a good way to tie those together and bring them to the web. Also, we make it really easy to automate a lot of the grunt work. If you use a wiki to build a training system, you're going to end up writing a lot of wiki markup by hand. And with Magnolia, especially if you're using Blossom, you end up writing small amounts of code that reuse things as much as possible. It just ends up being so much faster to develop in.
Am I creating web components with my own tags? Is that possible?
Do you have a specific example?
Well, I mean, like I'm looking at some other systems, particularly Dart, where I can go in and say, using the modern up-and-coming web component stuff that's being laid out. They're using Polyfill to backport it back to existing browsers, but I can essentially create what I would call a to-do list, and I'd have angle to-do list and / to-do list at the end. I imagine this is a function of JSP more than it is Magnolia, though, right?
And yeah, I don't know on that. I can't give you a decent answer.
Okay.
In general, if there's an existing Java-based system out there, chances are good we can integrate with it, especially if it follows an open standard or any of the better or commonly accepted best practices. Tobias might be able to give you an answer on that. But Has this progressed to the point where you're having your own conferences? Yeah. We have a yearly conference that we host in Basel. That's the big one. And we have another event upcoming in Miami that focuses on getting people up to speed with Magnolia quickly and on keeping partners up to date with the latest developments.
Cool. Let's go back to Tobias for a second. In terms of your interactions with the rest of the company and building more things about Blossom, I guess you're continuing to do that. And are you working on other parts of Magnolia besides Blossom?
Yes. So I work on the product development team, developing the core product. So the Blossom module maybe takes up 1 day a week. So I'm on the standard product, enhancing the rendering engine, the features there. In the last 3 years that I've been with the company, we've basically reimagined the CMS user interface to update it to the standard of today, or well, above the standard was the goal, of course. So with drawing inspiration from smartphones and the simplicity of smartphone interfaces. So the CMS has been enhanced with, well, it's an app concept where each app does one thing and does that one thing great, and it's all touch-based. So people using the system can do it on their iPads on the go. And so that's what I've been working on recently. And then we launched this this year.
So I had an additional question about the Blossom component of Magnolia. What's the most interesting thing you've seen someone use Blossom for, like in terms of like integrating Magnolia into their existing system, or using it to do something like completely different?
The most interesting would be a company in Atlanta which used it in combination with Akamai. That really, really impressed me. So what they do to achieve the scalability that they needed is they have Akamai in front of Magnolia, and it's like I mentioned before, Magnolia is a component-based CMS, and each of these components can actually be addressed individually. So you only render one little piece of the page. So what they're doing is, when Akamai needs a page, they serve it in full, and then they use something called edge side includes, which Akamai supports, to tell it when Akamai should go back and fetch which components. For instance, if one component can be cached only for 5 minutes, then Akamai will only read that component after 5 minutes. The rest of the page it can keep if that's cacheable for longer. And they use the Blossom module internally for powering all of these components, and got that working thanks to Akamai and Blossom. So that really blew my mind when I understood how powerful that solution was.
So just a follow-up question to using Blossom. So it allows developers to build their own CMS systems with Spring, correct?
No, not to build their own CMS, which that's a ton of work. It allows them to use the Spring framework on top of Magnolia. So a great CMS with a lot of effort put into it, with Spring and all of its features for integrating to other systems, all of the modern Java technologies like dependency injection, and take advantage of that in their project. So best of both worlds, the enterprise middleware from Spring and the content management from Magnolia.
Okay. So what like new features, what new directions is Magnolia and Blossom going to go in, like in the future? What is it that you guys are most interested, most excited to kind of add to the project?
For Blossom, I think the future improvement is to be able to extend it beyond the templating. So going forward, I want to provide the same programming model for building the user interface, so that you can develop your apps in Magnolia using the same programming style as Blossom. And what I mean by that is the CMS and most CMSs are heavily based on configuration. And with Blossom, there's instead of code-based style. So you're writing code to define things like dialogues on the content, what can be edited, whether it should be an edit box to enter the title, or if it should be in a text area and so on. So with Blossom, this is done in a programming style rather than configuring it. And this I want to do for apps. And the reason for that is because that it's so much faster for a developer to write code than to do configuration in a user interface or in an XML file.
So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to make sure that we covered everything you guys wanted to make sure we covered. So Tobias, first with you, is there anything we haven't said on this show that you want to make sure our audience is familiar with?
Maybe the experience of starting an open source project, if there's anyone in the audience thinking about open sourcing something that they have been working on, even if they're doing it in for a company, I would say that it's always a good idea to at least take the discussion with your management. If you have something that's worth open sourcing, chances are that they will allow it. And because it's a great experience putting it out there, putting it on SourceForge or GitHub, and then start to see people out there actually using it and benefiting from it. It's a great experience, and I think more people should give it a try.
Very cool. I would highly recommend that too, because obviously open source is mostly what I do, and life would be good for that. Also, so let's go with Zach. Zach, same question to you. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd really like to make sure we cover?
Yeah, I'm guessing most developers listening now are kind of like me. They're not Java people. And I would encourage them, if they encounter Magnolia in the wild, know that it's pretty friendly and don't shy away from it. There are lots of interesting extension points, everything from well-known stuff like REST to things like, for example, there's a contributed extension or a contributed product called PHPCR. It lets you hook into Magnolia's data layer easily, but you'd be writing PHP code to do so. So it's not as scary as it looks. Even though to hack on the core as a PHP and Ruby and Perl dev, yeah, the core is pretty alien to me, but there's so many great places to play with it. It's a lot of fun. It's a neat product to look at just from a developer perspective, especially around the mobile features.
Cool. So I have to ask the two required questions of both of my guests. Tobias, first to you. What is your favorite scripting language?
That would be FreeMarker, or maybe that's more of a templating language, in which case I would say Bash.
Oh, those are acceptable answers. Actually, I don't know what the first one is at all, so I'll just say, oh, that's interesting, and nod and look like I'm actually paying attention. Anyway, the second question would be your favorite text editor, and I can bet it's probably Eclipse or something, right?
I use IntelliJ IDEA, which is a fantastic IDE.
Cool. All right, great. And same questions for Zach. First, your scripting language?
For fun, Ruby. Totally love Ruby.
It's okay.
And wait.
How about for work?
For mangling large text files, Perl.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And your favorite text editor? And I bet I know what the answer is not going to be.
Vim. Also
yeah.
Vim.
Yeah. No Emacs people. Emacs people must be all dying out. That must be what it is. We're just an old group. That's all it is. Great. Well, guys, it's been wonderful having you on the show. I know the chat room has been going crazy about, I got to go try out this Magnolia thing now. So whatever you guys have been talking about seems to have enrolled a bunch of new people. So expect some more people to show up in your community and ask questions and do all that stuff. So thank you guys both for being on the show.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great. That was Zach. Oh, I should see my notes here. Here we go. Tobias Mattsson, who is he's on the product development team for Magnolia, and Zach Griant, if I didn't pronounce that wrong, a community manager for Magnolia. So Gareth, what do you think?
It definitely sounds interesting. I mean, I'm not a huge CMS user, but it sounds like they're really doing some interesting stuff, and Yeah, it definitely sounds like an interesting project. I mean, the Blossom project that allows people to kind of take their existing products or code and plug into the power that Magnolia gives them is yeah, it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously I'm not a big fan of Java. Well, that's not really so obvious. I just have learned to avoid Java in pretty much my entire career. If the next job I have to take has to be Java, I'll just go out and be a farmer or something instead. But it sounds like it's enterprise scale, not to use too many buzzwords, but enterprise web scale. And it's a lot of people behind it, a lot of people using it. That really, as I said in the show, that really surprised me that Atlassian, which is known for all of their enterprise Java products, a couple of my previous clients have used it in various ways, uses Magnolia. They've, out of all the possible Java CMS they could have picked, they picked Magnolia. So I think that actually speaks pretty highly to the reputation this thing must have. I'm glad it integrates with Swing, even though I still don't understand much about how that all works together. But that's not really, for those of you out there in my audience who understand Swing and Java and all that stuff, you're probably going, ooh, cool, it does this. Yay, good for you. All right, thank you. I'm going to stick with Dart and Template Toolkit and Perl and stuff like that for anything like that. So sounds like they got a good model in terms of being profitable, having pretty much putting all the eggs in the basket of being a support company rather than having a freemium model where you have to, you have a tiny core that's really useless and then you basically scale up for that. So I don't think Simon Phipps actually would have had too many complaints about this show. Any other comments, Gareth, before we go on?
No, I was just going to reiterate what you said. It's good to see a company take that direction with their product, not necessarily have a crippled community version and a feature-filled commercial version, but actually base the commercial version off the community edition. And maybe it's got like a couple commercial components that they can't necessarily open source, but for the most part, you're getting the same code between the two versions, and you're just paying for support.
That would be similar to the Fedora Red Hat relationship, or are they further apart?
Very similar from what I understand. I believe Red Hat Enterprise follows Fedora the developer cycle of Fedora. Yeah, so a very similar model from what I understand.
And this would be different than the model between, say, Red Hat and CentOS, where CentOS is essentially repackaging Red Hat's exact release rather than the sort of upstreaminess of Fedora. So I think I've understood that all pretty well, but I never know. So when it's about Linux, I don't know much about Linux. Sorry, guys. It's just not my area. all the things that I should know about in my own arena is Linux, but sorry, I run FreeBSD and I run OS 10 on my desktop and iOS on my phone, and I'm going to get bad email from that already. I can already hear the people typing right away. Well, speaking of upcoming guests, that's my awkward transition for the week. We are right up against a couple of holidays in the U.S., Christmas and New Year's. Actually, that's probably holidays for almost everybody in the world. So, but at least in the U.S. So our tapings normally would have been on Christmas Day and New Year's Day, and I don't blame anybody at the Twit Brick House for not wanting to come in on Christmas Day or even speaking to us as a guest. So we're skipping two shows. We're going to come right back in the first week in January with Arcos, which is data hosting on a Raspberry Pi. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully I get Aaron on that show because he's a big Raspberry Pi fan. We just added to the show Roberto Rosario, who is a high-up person in, I think he's chief of open source in Puerto Rico. We had him on, I think, about 3 years ago. I should have looked it up before I did this show, but he has a whole new thing. He's all about openness and transparency in government, and one of the things he's done recently is they now have a API for all of their open data, which means that you can write code that hits their servers talking to their open API and use it for mashups and other things. So they still call them mashups? I guess they do. Where basically you can aggregate data from official Puerto Rican government websites all the way into things like Google Maps and whatever you want. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him. It was a great conversation with him a couple of years ago about his desire to get open source into the Puerto Rican government. We also have, talked about this already, we have Go, which is the other big Google language. I'm learning Dart and deploying Dart actually coming up soon. But Go has been around for a bit longer. It's a sort of a server-side language with a lot of concurrency management and, think of Node.js, but written in a language that's not JS. So that might be a good way to match that. I'm probably going to get yelled at for that description too. I should really do my research a little bit better for these. Also, just added to the schedule is CoreOS, CoreOS. And the banner across their website says Linux for massive server deployments. And that's about all I know about it so far. So I guess it's a way of having a whole way to, set out hundreds and hundreds of servers, ramping up things in the cloud. I am continuing to fill in Q1. We've got more emails going out again this week, as I always say. I probably actually will send out some emails this week. I sent out a bunch of emails. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 2 new ones already. You can always look at twit.tv/floss. There's a spreadsheet linked from there. It's also the homepage for the show. The spreadsheet link from there about everybody I'm working on. If there's a project that you want on the show that you don't see on that spreadsheet, email the project leader, have the project leader email me, merlin@stonehenge.com. That is the simplest way to do this, to get them on the list and get them early on the list. If you just tell me the name of a project, it goes way further down, like about midway down the list, and I probably will never get to it because I'm kind of lazy that way. I have only so many hours a week to be able to do Floss Weekly, and I want to optimize those. So please help me out. Let's crowdsource this, and you'll get some really great guests. You guys control the guests. If you guys want a particular guest, y'all, I should not say you guys, it's sexist, sorry. Y'all, if y'all want a guest on the show, bring them to me. Bring them to me, and I will take care of them. Yes, definitely. merlin@stonehenge.com. You can follow us on Floss Weekly on Google+. I try to post all the shows. Oh, I forgot to post today. Darn it. I was supposed to announce today's show. I'm out of it. I was just way out of it. Sorry about that, guys. But on Google+, Floss Weekly, we have a number of followers there. You can also see us on Floss Weekly on Twitter. It's all one word, Floss Weekly. We have a live chat. We took, I think, one question from the chat this time. That's at live.twit.tv. Actually, we had a lively chat about the show happening. Nobody was asking questions, though, that we actually used. We're on typically 8:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. So, but check the spreadsheet because it actually has the upcoming schedule, and we might move a show or two around. You can follow me at Merlin, MERLYN, on Twitter. But more likely, you're going to see me on Google+ at Randall L. Schwartz. And coming up real soon, I'll have to announce this soon. I talked about this a little bit last week, but I've been invited to be a guest on the new Linux Voice podcast. Linux Voice is relaunching itself as a online magazine. They've got a Kickstarter that's actually working on that. But they've also got this great podcast. And a surprise, I listened to the shows over the last week, and our friend and co-host Dan Lynch was at least on a couple of the shows. So next time Dan's on here with me, I'll have to get him to talk more about what Linux Voice is. But as soon as I actually get interviewed for that show, I will let you know so you can go download even more of my little chatting. Also coming up real soon, I think it's sometime mid-February, I'm going to be at the SoCal Linux Expo, also called Scale. I've already been accepted as a press person, so I'll be walking around gathering interviews for Floss Weekly and also finding upcoming guests. But I've also submitted a paper to see if I'm going to be a speaker as well. The talk I submitted is the same thing I did at OSCON, which was My Half-Life with Perl, or Half My Life with Perl, actually, is what the official title was. But I like the other title instead, My Half-Life with Perl, talking about 25 years of Perl, 50 years of my life, and how those have influenced each other. Oh, by the way, I guess, Gareth, that would be your cue to talk about your Scale project.
That was a beautiful segue.
Yes.
So yeah, Scale. Scale is happening February 21st to the 23rd, 2014 in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
I get that as right before the show, I'll have the dates like down packed.
Yeah, you have one job. You should just know the dates. That's all.
I know. I should get like a Post-it note and stick it right in front of me. Here's the dates. I might actually do that because I always forget them. February 21st through the 23rd, 2014. Our call for papers is now closed, but we got a ton of submissions. We'll be slowly whittling our way down into very difficult job of selecting the best possible speakers that we can. I am accepting bribes in form of cookies from those that submitted talks. So I can't say that it will influence me, but hey, you never know. And if anyone is interested in attending, we're offering a promo code FLOSS for a 50% discount for a full access pass.
So you're saying that dentists will get in half price?
I'm saying the dentist will get in half price. Yeah, exactly.
Well, Gareth, it's good to have you on the show again. As a co-host, you've really been filling out and rounding out as one of our co-hosts, and I really appreciate you coming forward a couple months ago and letting me start the process with you, and it's always been pleasurable.
Yeah, happy to do it. Always have a good time.
Very good. And I'll be seeing you in person, I guess, in about a month or whenever those dates are that you can't remember. No, 2 months. I guess one of those dates. See, I can't even do the math. It's still only December.
Math is hard. Math is hard.
For Christmas and New Year's both, I will be on a cruise ship, so I will be sort of away from the net. Although we actually have Wi-Fi on the net. I got 3 days of sailing down to 5 stops at various Eastern Caribbean locations. I think I've been to all of them, but I don't think I've been to St. Kitts. No, I guess I've been to St. Kitts once. So anyway, the St. Thomas and St. Martin and all those crazy saints down there. So the saints will come marching in for me between the time I talk to you now and the time I talk to you next. Hopefully I'll be back in the first of the year hosting the opening show of the year. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me or any questions about the show, suggestions about the show, merlin@stonehenge.com. Send me comments. Also, that's the address to have the project leader of the project you want on email me. So I think I have fleshed out everything I possibly can. We'll see you again next time on FLOSS Weekly.